Oh, yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. Hope the sun is shining. Hope the birds are singing. Hope the wind is at your back. I wanted to jump in today. I got a guest that should be joining us pretty soon, but we got some scheduling conflicts, so there's a good chance that he may not be showing up. However, I thought it was a good opportunity to kind of jump in and talk about what I see coming as the next sort of revolution or evolution in the world of the psychedelic movement. What I see coming forward is sort of a more dismantling approach. I think that what we're about to see on maybe the next 6 months to the next 2 years is sort of a dismantling of the structures of oppression that control our modern society. And the guest I have lined up is Reverend Gabriel Castillo, a younger gentleman who's been trained and apprenticed in a lot of different ways. But I kind of see that as the future of the psychedelic movement. What we have been seeing lately is a lot of kids, a lot of professionals that have been working with veterans, that have been working in the medical container, that have been writing papers and publishing papers. And there's been a lot of patent seeking that I've seen happening. And I'm for all of it. Like, I am for the future of psychedelics. But what I'm beginning to notice on the forefront is sort of a leaner, meaner, sharper edge to it. And what I mean by that is we see the way the world is moving. Psychedelics are going to be that sort of serrated edge that helps us dismantle the oppression and the control in modern society. It's kind of always been that way. When you look at the medical container with which the psychedelics were held in the late 50s, and it gave way to the 60s, sort of this, revolutionary moment. I see that on the forefront again. I think that the more we see financial oppression, the more we see sort of this idea of public-private partnerships, you're going to see the psychedelic move in towards that and start dismantling a little bit. Because really what it seems to me is that as society breaks down, new leaders emerge. And the way new leaders emerge is through new ideas. And that's what the psychedelic movement is really moving towards, is this opening up of the aperture. This, sometimes the psychedelic trance or the psychedelic odyssey, if you will, allows you to see things you wouldn't see. And that's the foundation of the healing that happens in there. People are seeing themselves in a different perspective. They're seeing themselves in a different way. And that's leading to this revolution in health in some ways. That's what's allowing the people with PTSD or the people that have been abused to look at their relationships without shame. And when you can do that, you're able to move past the problems and begin healing yourself. Well, the same is true, as we say all the time on this podcast, as above, so below. So when we look at the individual healing, that is going to radiate outwards towards the community healing. And it's unfortunate that sometimes in order to heal, you have to peel away the wound. You have to rip off the scab a little bit in order to disinfect it. And that's what I mean by dismantling the structures of oppression. We see in our society, whether it's government, whether it's corporate, we see these particular entities that are they don't seem to care too much about the people that make them great. Take a look at your society. Like, how many homeless people are out there? How many people with mental illness are on the streets? And what is the community doing about it? Pretty much nothing. because there's no real money in fixing it. There's money in creating institutions around it that treat those people like cattle. There's tons of that. There's tons of nonprofits out there that are finding ways to squeeze the weakest among us for profit. And that's what not only the community, but the state and the government, and most of the time, it's a corporation that's doing it. And so I think psychedelics is going to be a huge part of awakening to that. How can we use the psychedelic movement in order to challenge and redefine our concepts of power and authority? This is a pretty good question. And if anybody's in the chat that wants to jump in on that, let me know. I think that we're going to be able to use these altered states of awareness to redefine our concepts of power and authority in multiple ways. One idea of power that's changing is that power definitely corrupts, but I think the corrupted people in power are the weakest among us. And I want to say that again. The people that are corrupted by power are the weakest among us, because once you've been corrupted by so much power, you no longer can trust anyone. And if you look at our politicians, be it state or government or the leaders, a lot of leaders in the community seem to be corrupted by this idea of power. These are the weakest people among us. And isn't it interesting that so many people that are currently community leaders or governors or senators or people running for president, like they're way over there. They're way over 70. Like, think about this for a minute. I think that we're going to see a radical push towards people, boomers actually, or people in positions of power being forced to step down. Because it seems to me, through whether it's altered states of awareness or whether it's just where we are in the community, that a lot of the problems we have are these old ideas held by people in power that make zero sense. Like, can someone like the people running for president, whether it's Biden or Trump or Gavin Newsom, any of these people in positions of authority that are well past their expiration date, they're holding on to ideas that make zero sense for the youth. They're sort of sucking the blood of the youth in order to have a little bit more longevity. And this is where the psychedelic movement is going to awaken the youth. My guest, Reverend Gabriel Castillo, when he comes on, here's an individual who's, in his 20s. And when you listen to some of the things he says, it sounds radical, but that's what we need. We need radical change. And the people in power are never going to allow for radical change because it takes away all their ideas. It takes away all their power. And if history is the best predictor of future, then we can see that power is never relinquished. It's always taken. Power must be taken. And look at the people that are in power right now. They're never going to give it up. Let's take a moment and look at the financial sector. I was listening today to a speech by Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock. This guy's going around the world talking about public-private partnerships. And let me just spell that out for everybody, what that means. That means the public is going to take all the losses, and the corporate sector is going to privatize all the profits. It's already happening in California. If you look at California, you can see that Nestle has privatized the water. It's all their water. You as an individual, as a farmer, you don't have rights to water. Nestle has all the rights to the water. Let's expand that out to Idaho. Look what's happening in Idaho right now. You can see that there's a cobalt mine going in Idaho, and the mining company has made a deal with the senators for public land to take all the water, the farmers, the people be damned. The idea of the public-private partnership is already been done and over with. And I think that this is another reason why we're going to see the leading edge of the psychedelic movement be the serrated blade, which cuts through this idea of what's left in the community. Does that kind of make sense? Like, so many people in our country, I'll just talk about the US. So many people in the US believe that we live in this United States of America under a constitution where we have all these rights. That's gone. That's gone. It's no longer that you have the rights that you think you do. It's no longer that you think that the Constitution protects you. It's not. This is a public-private partnership. The senators and the corporations work together to steal all the money from the individual people that are working. And that's why you're going to continue to see job losses. You're going to continue to see all of these things happen. that's why altered states of awareness are so important for you to understand, because they allow the blinders to come off. Clint Kyle's, everybody should be checking out the Clint Kyle's podcast, the Psychedelic Christian podcast. Clint jumps in right here and he says, one of the most important impressions we get from altered states of awareness is the ability to imagine alternatives to the status quo. Those profiting from the status quo do not appreciate being questioned. Clint, I couldn't agree anymore. This is exactly what's happening. And this is, correct me if I'm wrong, Clint, but this is what I see as the next evolution of the psychedelic movement, be it MDMA. I know that's not a classical psychedelic, entheogens, all these analogs coming out. And I think that you're going to begin to see this radical movement coming out of it. And how can you not? Like once we healed so many of the veterans, we have now allowed those veterans to help individuals build community. And I think that's what's going to happen. We've healed a lot of veterans, and they are going to go back into their community, and those are going to become the bedrock of the revolution that helps us dismantle some of these structures that got us into this mess. Now, while that may be true, I do think you're going to see a push to put the genie back in the bottle. Once government officials, the state, start seeing young groups of young men, groups of young people beginning to rally around radical ideas like freedom, or radical ideas like we don't want corruption in our state, I think you're going to see the cops called in, more things like, what's up, Crystal? Thanks for joining us today. We're talking about the radical movement of what's to come in the future here. And so I got another question for everybody here. What does it truly mean to decolonize our minds? And how can psychedelics facilitate that process? So this is, again, what Clint and I were talking about. When you think about colonization, I know that word gets thrown around a lot by different groups, but the same way that Britain or the West has colonized different parts of the world, so too has corporate America colonized our mind. And they have done that through incredible propaganda in advertising, incredible propaganda in the mainstream media. And so this colonization of the mind has led to a narrow stream of thinking that doesn't allow you to see the alternatives. And back to psychedelics, this is where taking, an entheogen, or as I like to call them, an exogenous neurotransmitter, allows you as the individual to reopen your mind and communicate with the divine. It allows you to see something that's bigger than you, but not only see something that's bigger than you, understand that you're a part of something bigger than you. And when that happens, when you begin to understand that you're a part of something bigger than you, whoa, the walls begin to open up, your eyes begin to open up, and you start realizing how badly you're getting fucked, how badly the people in positions of authority don't want you to awaken. So they just try to give you this bread and this circus. I'll give you an example as a union employee. I used to be a union employee for quite some time. When you awaken to the idea that the big unions, the AFL-CIO, the Teamsters, they're actually in cahoots with the very people, like they're in cahoots with the very companies. You know how we do it, Crystal, thanks. Yeah, these entities, because they're so big, are actually working together to benefit one another. The very walls that were built to protect the individual from being colonized, from their mind being colonized, these particular entities that were built to help us are now being used to contain us. And that needs dismantling. We need to form new ways of building a community together. And it's interesting to me. So many people have big ideas about like, we need to rebuild Ukraine. We need to send money to Israel. We don't need to do any of that. Like that is a huge problem. What we should be doing is building individual communities and finding ways in which we can have alternate states of commerce. I think alternate states of commerce definitely coincide with alternate states of awareness. Let's think about that for a minute. If we can find a different way to pay one another, if we can find a different way to trade with one another, then we sort of cut the head off the beast in some ways. Here we go. Crystal is chiming in. Crystal says, we need to chat about an opportunity that just fell in my lap, and is talking about this, and it came to me from her brother-in-law. Yeah, Crystal, I'm for it. I know that you got some cool documentaries coming out there, and I think that we do need more of this. I think we need more individuals out there that are finding their voice and bringing their story online, because there's nothing more powerful than when you get into a community and you hear your story from the lips of another person. That is an incredible motivator. That is something that builds a groundswell of change that cannot be stopped by people in positions of authority. And so I'm for it, Crystal. I think there needs to be more of it. I think we need to foster genuine community resilience and solidarity through different experiences. And for me, that has been through the psychedelic experience. I see the communities coming together. I see the communities coming in from different parts of the world and bringing together solutions that aren't so much top down. They don't come to you as a structured solution like a public-private partnership. It comes to you as a community-based organization from the ground up. That's the way we're going to be able to change the world we live in. There's too much public-private partnerships. And I just want to ring that bell, because the public-private partnership is going to privatize all the profits and socialize all the losses. And I just do not want to see any more of this happen to my kids, to your kids, and to any of our kids or our communities. It seems to me that our communities are just being squeezed out like Clint says, like the toothpaste here. Here's another great comment from Clint. The proverbial toothpaste is out of the tube. It's going to be extremely difficult for the tyrannical powers that be to restrict access to psychedelics and blockchain technology like Bitcoin. These are the frontiers of change. Clint, thank you 100%. These are the frontiers of change. I think that on some level, AI is the Library of Alexandria, and psychedelics are the evolution of mind with which we're able to see it. These are going to be the things that fundamentally change the way we operate, not only in our country, but around the world. I think it's well overdue. I think it's time to start embracing these things instead of trying to fight tooth and nail to keep them from happening. So again, I want to caution people on another thing that I kind of see happening around the curve here, and that is this idea of people in positions of authority. I'm a little fearful on some level to see what may be happening to the boomer generation. I think we're going to see a really large push towards scamming and abuse of the boomer community. No one wants that to happen. But whenever there is people in positions of authority that refuse to give up, maybe it's them, maybe it's the people around them, but they're refusing to leave. They're refusing to leave. I could see in the near future a law being passed that says anyone over the age of 62 is no longer capable of holding authority as board of directors in government, in the state government, in nonprofits. I could see laws like that being passed because the animosity that's happening from the youth, myself included, and everybody underneath me, when they see the wealth locked up in this older generation that's clinging to ideas, that's clinging to unrealistic expectations of life, that is going to turn into something sinister. And you can already see it with the scams. Sometimes I like to read up on some of those scams that are happening. And one of the scams that you see are these internet scams where older people are getting called up and people are using AI to use their kid's voice to ask them for money. And, I think on some level, there's books like The Fourth Turning that speak about these ideas of generational turns. And because the older generation is such a massive generation, I feel like, and I'm scared for this. And if anybody has any ways to help solve this, I would love to hear them. And I would love to even do a show about it. But the amount of wealth and the amount of stagnation, the amount of bad ideas that are coming from the older generations in power, They have to go. They have to go. And on some level, I'm curious if maybe we could start some sort of, campaign, maybe a social media campaign that asks the older generation to please step aside before you're forced aside. I don't want to see people get hurt. I don't want to see people thrown out of power. But on the same level, we can't expect the youth of tomorrow to even have a chance unless the older people are willing to step down. And if they're not willing to step down, they're going to be forced down, maybe thrown down some stairs. And I just don't want to see that happen. So that is another reason why I'm out here today. The psychedelic movement, I think, is going to push that on some level. I think it's imperative to also talk about, like, what can the older generation do to help? Well, they can do a lot to help. They can really help pass on a lot of wisdom and good ideas, but they can't do it from the bully pulpit, or they can't do it with an iron fist, or they can't do it with like a staff and a rod trying to beat down the younger generation. That's not going to work. But what they could do is we could start setting up these institutions where, I had this idea called the gift to give, where we come together in parks, or we come together in a theater, and we have people in palliative care. We have the senior citizens giving out advice, how they wish they could have done things different. What have they done in their life? Did they regret something in their life? Because that is the wisdom of the elders that could be shared with the next generation and applied to their life so that they don't have to make the same mistakes. And when we can bring the generations together like that, I think that there's a real opportunity to start healing some of this intergenerational problems that we have. But I think there's other ideas like that where we can begin having sort of rites of passage, ceremonies, if you will. And I think psychedelics could play a big role in that. Imagine if we had some sort of community development where we were embracing ideas like the gift to give, or we were bringing the older generation to speak to the younger generation. I think that there's a lot that could be learned there. And I think that that's a positive step in healing the generational trauma. In a world driven by materialism and consumerism, how can the insights gained from psychedelics or altered states of awareness shift our collective consciousness towards more sustainable and equitable ways of living? This is a great question. I think we're moving away from materialism and consumerism, and we're beginning to see, and I think it's an evolution. I think we're beginning to see that the material reductionism that we've seen in the world isn't helping anybody. And in fact, you're starting to see a lot of animosity to the people that embrace the materialism and the consumerism. And it's obvious in the models of social media. Like, let's look at the models of social media where it's pay to play. Mainstream media tried to make a move into social media, and the only way anybody would watch any of their videos is if they paid the giant social media companies tons of money in order to show their videos. And you can see that these particular social media companies like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, they've all moved to this pay to play model. And in doing so, they have monopolized the information. They have monopolized the eyes out there. Like, if you want to have your video seen, or you want to have a viral video, you have to pay for it now. I guess it's probably been always the model, but in some level, I think that's a reason for hope, because the only way that these messages get out from the old school mainstream media is if they're paying millions of dollars, and still nobody's watching them. There are probably a lot of bots that thumbs them up and give them the views that they want. So you're seeing these alternative companies come up, and we've seen stuff like Rumble and different companies began moving up in the world of social media. And I think there's going to be more of them. So I think that's a positive to see us move away from materialism and consumerism. And I think altered states of awareness are allowing us to move away from the narrow ideas of materialism and consumerism. What is the role of altered states of awareness in reconnecting us with the earth and fostering ecological awareness in action? This is a great question. I think that the role of altered states of awareness in reconnecting us with the earth and fostering ecological awareness is becoming aware that you're part of it. Alan Watts has a great line where he says that you don't come into this world, you come out of it. And when you begin understanding that the earth grows people like an apple tree grows apples, you can't help but begin to understand that you're connected to everything around you. Everything around you. Just go outside and sit in silence and watch the plants around you. And they'll begin to talk to you, not using English, not using Spanish, but you can begin to understand the language of the environment around you when you see a flower bloom. Just take a look, like, how tall is the plant when the flower blooms? That means it has to go through a certain stage in order to produce a flower. It has to go through a certain stage in order to produce a fruit. It has to grow roots underground. It has to go through the vegetative stage, and then it's ready. I think that's where we are right now. This giant seismic shift that we're beginning to see in the world around us is announcing a new stage. It's announcing a fruiting stage, a renaissance, if you will. It's beginning to show us, hey, we are moving in to a world where the paradigm is different. And sometimes the birth pangs look a lot like death. Right? There's the afterbirth when it comes to death. And anybody who's had a child knows that there's a real chance of something dying in birth. Sometimes it's the mom. Sometimes it's the child. Sometimes it's the innocence of understanding that dies. And I think that that is all happening right now. If you look at us as part of the earth, as that apple in the apple tree, a large part of us is dying. This boomer generation is dying, and they are banging on the gurney. I want one more day. I want to stay in power. We should bomb Ukraine. We should have a genocide in Gaza. Like, these are old men with dumb ideas. These people are dumb, and they have to go. They have to move. Otherwise, the next generation has no chance of going up. So I think that what we're seeing are these birth pangs, and it looks bloody. It looks dangerous. It looks horrible. But at the end of the day, we're going to see something beautiful arise out of it. We're going to see new life. We're going to see a new world emerge out of it. And that is something everybody should be focusing on, because you have a choice. You can be part of the new life, or you can succumb to the propaganda and the poor ideas that are being thrust into your mind by mainstream media. You should be seeking voices that speak of light and positivity and change and invite you to involve yourself in that change. I think that the world is full of invitations. And if you're listening and looking in the right directions, then you can find that invitation calling to you. If you spend some time meditating, if you spend some time alone, if you spend some time with something beautiful, then you will see that invitation there. You can follow your heart, and you can follow the voices and become part of the positive change that needs to happen. In what ways can the psychedelic experience help dismantle the prison industrial complex and promote restorative justice? Well, I think we're seeing that right now. I think that the prison industrial complex begins with the prison of language around us. And I want to say that again, because as I'm talking about this, it's helping me kind of just stream this consciousness. So in order to dismantle the prison industrial complex, we have to change the language. We have to change what words mean so that we don't get imprisoned in old ideas. There's lots of people with lots of money that are trying to control the narrative. And when they control the narrative, they trap you into a way of thinking. And when you're trapped into a way of thinking, you're trapped into a prison industrial complex. Like, here's one for you. Why is the psychedelic community just wrapped up so tight in this medical container? It's wrapped around this idea of clinical trials and hey, you have to go to this certain school and write this certain paper, and maybe you'll get funded by this certain company, and then maybe we can get a patent to have a pharmaceutical company help you present this in your center. Like, that is the medical prison system in which nothing gets out unless it can make a profit. We don't need that. Psychedelics and theogens have been around forever. What if we change the name from drugs or psychedelics to exogenous neurotransmitters? You see what I mean by that? Like, that frees things up. That changes how we're able to see things. That changes the laws. That changes what we're capable of. I know it's going to be messy, but we already see in the psychedelic community parts of abuse or, inappropriate behavior, but that's nothing different than what happens throughout the time memorial. It's going to happen. It's going to be messy. And I think that the real change is not going to come from the medical community. It's not going to come from, schools writing papers or, pharmaceutical companies sponsoring like clinical trials. That is not going to change shit, in my opinion. The real change is going to come from the underground. The real change is going to come from people who have studied indigenous wisdom, people who have experimented on themselves, by themselves, and are familiar with the territory. You know what I mean by that? There's one thing to have the map is not the territory. And you can go to school and you can read a map, but that map doesn't mean anything when you're out in the environment and you realize it's a dead end. And too many maps, too many cartographers making maps are people that have never had any experience. So the real change is going to come from the people that have the courage to traverse these environments by themselves. And they're going to make mistakes, but they're going to do a lot more healing than they are going to do making mistakes. How do we navigate the intersection of psychedelics and mental health in a way that challenges pharmaceutical monopolies and prioritizes holistic healing? This is a great question, and I think that I kind of touched on it a little bit. But the way that we navigate the intersection of psychedelics and mental health is to realize that the experts in mental health may not be the experts that we think they are. Like, what are the experts in mental health? When I think of experts in mental health, I think of the DSM-5. I sometimes I read through the DSM-5, and that just sounds like a lot of people making up a lot of bullshit to become famous. That sounds like a lot of people getting together like, what's the problem? The guy that taps his foot a lot. That guy has restless leg syndrome. Like, that's what it seems to me what the DSM and all these things are. I think that we as individuals can begin moving through different ideas of what mental health is. I think we need to redefine what mental health is. And that's going to allow us the avenues in order to create new pathways to get through it. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for hanging out with me today. I wanted to do a little stream of consciousness to figure out what's going on in the world, what's going to be coming up next, and how we're going to move through the next stage of psychedelics. That's all we got for today, ladies and gentlemen. Aloha.